Isuzu, in America in 2022. For an increasing number of the population, this name is Isuzu. It's an entirely unfamiliar array of unusual consonants and vowels. Like Blockbuster Video, Isuzu was once a household name, respected and enjoyed by many decades ago. But now all that's left are the fond yet fading memories of relics from a bygone era. Making its debut stateside in 1984, the Trooper took aim at its American competition, mainly the Jeep Cherokee. But the Isuzu was understandably an acquired taste. Originally only offered as a 3-door with an optional rear bench seat, the 82 horsepower Japanese newcomer wasn't met with the same popularity as the Cherokee. Perhaps because they didn't even know what to call it. Well, which is it, Isuzu? However, by 1988, not only could you now get the Trooper with 5 doors, but an automatic transmission was an option alongside 2 more powerful engine variants. Choose between a GM-sourced 2.8-liter V6, which made 125 horsepower, or a 2.6-liter fuel-injected 4-cylinder, which made, 120 horsepower. For those mathematically challenged, that's just 5 horses less than the V6. Did these updates help to dethrone Jeep, or steal sales away from Range Rover? Not quite, but it was at least popular enough to pick up a second season. These days, nearly 40 years since hitting our shores, the humble Trooper faces new competition, as advised to gain the collector status that many other Radwood-era 4x4s have garnered in recent years. In the meantime, however, these boxy, multi-purpose 4x4 utility wagons will continue to be kept alive by the small but growing cult of Isuzu obsessives like myself until they achieve the recognition they deserve. Like most 33-year-olds, this Trooper is at a point in its life when appearances begin to take a back seat. As aging grips every aspect of life, looking youthful tends to fall by the wayside, all while attempting to prolong the inevitable gradually usurps all other priorities. Gone are the days of shiny paint, chrome bumpers, and supple rubber trimmings. From now on, good enough is the aesthetic benchmark. Who are we trying to impress anyway? Like your 98-year-old grandmother, their mere existence is a spectacle all its own. You can look past her gray teeth and cataracts and celebrate the fact that she's alive at all. Analogies aside, this Trooper's exterior condition has actually held up exceptionally well. Having spent its entire life in the Southwest, it's virtually rust-free, and of course has been resprayed at least once. As indicated by the color code, it was originally a 2-toned white over pewter paint scheme. And judging by various recurring instances of overspray, I'm left to assume that someone had tried to paint the car red before eventually reverting back to white. It's a bit rough and uneven in spots, but just stand 50 feet back, take your glasses off, and it'll look pristine. Good as new. Oh, and speaking of new, when this car was new, the front end looked a bit different than it does now. You see, in 1988, Isuzu facelifted the Trooper, outfitting it with flush-mounted rectangular headlights and a new grille. This round headlight style was the pre-facelift design found on Troopers before 1988. One of the previous owners swapped the front fascia in favor of this older design, and built these custom front and rear bumpers while they were at it. And before the comments flood in asking what the wheel and tire setup is, they're 31 by 10.5-inch Mickey Thompson Baja MTZ P3 tires on the factory-optioned 15-inch snowflake-style wheels. But go ahead, ask me again. I dare you. When new, most Troopers sold in the US likely enjoyed a life of underutilized potential. As with most family haulers of the time, they were used for just that, family hauling. But as they entered the second-hand market, they soon became an affordable option as a reliable workhorse. Now, instead of juice stains and Cheerio crumbs being the most dangerous threats to an interior's purity, you've the likes of oil, mud, lumber, and your miscellaneous sharp and pointies. With no foresight that such a vehicle would ever be viewed as a classic, it's with reckless abandon that fluids and foliage were flung. For this reason, finding a first-gen Trooper with a virgin interior is like finding hen's teeth in a haystack. When I purchased this Trooper, The interior was far from factory original. This is what it used to look like. Everything from the seats to the carpet and even the door cards were replaced by a previous owner in favor of something a bit more handcrafted. Someone clearly had a fetish for beige polypropylene carpeting. Needless to say, it had to go. With some luck and patience, I was able to source an all-original interior from a fellow trooper enthusiast deep in the Sonoran Desert. With that secured, all that was left to do was rip out the old carpet, scrape away endless layers of dried fabric adhesive, repaint the metal with a fresh coat of white, and install the very brown interior. Voila! Back to its 80s glory. Well, nearly. The driver's seat isn't perfect. Its leather is cracked and the woven fabric is worn, but I am in the process of patching it, just to give it a bit more strength. On a more positive note, of the few amenities this interior features, most of them are in working order, thanks to a bit of tinkering on my end. Since its purchase, I fixed both the temperature gauge and oil pressure gauge, as well as the electric windows. The only non-functioning items are the rear defroster, not that I really need it in Arizona, and of course the AC needs to be converted and recharged, which I definitely do need in Arizona. But one thing at a time, I suppose. When I purchased this Trooper back in December of 2020, I knew it was going to require a fair bit of elbow grease to rejuvenate the numerous neglected mechanical components. But being my first true project car, I soon found that my elbows would need to produce a lot more grease than I was initially prepared for. This Trooper came pre-packaged with 3 main issues that I knew would need to be tackled first. It was leaking oil from the rear main seal, it stalled at idle, and worst of all, it couldn't pass an emissions test. The latter of which was a rabbit hole into which I thought I'd never escape. But more on that in a bit. Since the rear main seal was the most obvious fix, I started there. $33 for the seal and a few weekends in hell is all it took to have that taken care of. See my video on that linked above and below. Next, to fix the stalling issue, I investigated a myriad of potential culprits. I first started by banging my head against a wall. As usual, this did not fix my problem. But through a bit of research, I found my answer. Turns out, the idle air control valves are notorious for seizing up and causing the engine to stall at idle. $167 and a few hours in hell had that all sorted. I've made a video about that too. And now, the final gauntlet, getting this filthy 4-cylinder to pass emissions. Now that it could idle, I was hearing an audible misfire and the engine shook like a caffeinated toddler. Clearly, the fuel-air mixture was off. And in an old truck like this, you can just about guarantee that the labyrinth of brittle, cracked vacuum lines will be the source of any number of issues. So I replaced most of the vacuum lines and quadruple checked to make sure they went into all the right places. Then I did a compression test. Realizing this should have been one of the first things I did, I resumed banging my head against a wall. The numbers were not confidence-inspiring. 150, 143, 133, and 165. Not ideal. There was no oil in the coolant or coolant in the oil, so I ruled out a head gasket. I then learned about setting the valve clearances, something I had never heard of doing. So I tried that next, and wouldn't you know it, it fixed the compression. 150, 150, 145, and 150. Much better. The misfire and poor emission still persisted, however, but I was one step closer. In my final efforts, and to make a very long story short, I revamped the EGR system, replaced 2 faulty fuel injectors, installed a new cat, and set the ignition timing to spec. After all of that, the turmoil, the questioning of sanity, the bruised forehead, my burning desire to push the car off a cliff and just end it already, it finally passed. And so ended my first year-long journey with restoring the Trooper. Here's hoping the following years will bring more journeys, albeit with a bit more driving this time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next mile.